We've all got the blues. The Blue Devils. A fit of melancholy, as the 16th century described it, an exquisite and terrible suffering turned into music. From the 1500s to the consecration of the genre, the blues, at the turn of the 20th. Music has voiced a huge continuum of emotionally blue experience, from the seductively, sharply sweet love-death of Claudio Monteverdi's madrigals, to the king of blues, Robert Johnson, in the Mississippi Delta in the early 20th century.
I went to the crossroads, fell down on my knees.
It was born in the oppressed communities of African Americans at the turn of the 20th century and given to the world. And it was taken by the world too, so that the blues is something that composers from Maurice Ravel to Igor Stravinsky or musicians from Mick Jagger to Elvis Presley
Knock me down, step in my face, slander my name all over the place. We'll do anything that you want to do, but honey, lay off them shoes and don't you step on my blue suede shoe. Well, you can do anything but take me over my blue suede shoe.
They've all recognised the power of the blues and wanted it for themselves. They've taken it from its original context and remade it in their image, and almost certainly in yours too. We all love the blues, just as we all love and need to be blue from time to time. So how does music sing the blues? How have blue notes expressed our melancholies over the centuries? But first of all, why is the blues blue? What is it about the colour? Well, there are theories about this that go back to the association between the closeness of dark blue to black on the spectrum of colours and shades. Or it's because perhaps ships were painted blue when their captains were killed in the great days of the British Navy. Or maybe it's because blue was the colour of rain for the ancient Greeks and of tears for the Anglo-Saxons. The word blue was first used in this context by Geoffrey Chaucer in his poem from 1385, Complaint of Mars. As the poem says, "With tears blue and a wounded heart." Tears blue. Tears. Lacrimae in Latin, the etymological seed of the lamenting lacrimosa, those movements in all those requiem settings, like Mozart's. But the definition of the sound of tears in music is this: John Dowland's lute song "Flow My Tears" from the end of the 16th century. Flow my tears, fall from your springs, where night's blackbird her sad infamy sings. John Dowland's own words, and in this music the melody rises only so that it might fall with more exquisite pleasure-pain. And all this makes physiological sense. Our whole body language changes when we cry. We sigh with our shoulders as well as our faces. Our tears fall as they must. And when we cry in distress, our voices naturally start high and go low. And this literal musical falling of pitch is always there in music when the composer wants to pull at our heartstrings. It's there in the nation's favourite song, Dido's Lament by Purcell. It's there in Bach. And it suffuses 20th century music as well. Here's the Hungarian composer George Ligeti, his horn trio, a movement called Lamento, and it laments. Now this isn't called Lamento or Tears or anything like that, but it's the final movement of Tchaikovsky's Pathetic Symphony. This symphony burns here with its falling tears, Night's Black Bird, or the blues. Tchaikovsky really did have the blues. But let's get back to the Elizabethan era, where this idea of feeling blue really started, and really started to be expressed in art. Early 17th century England seemed to be somewhere where you could find melancholia on every street corner. It's in music, literature, and the theatre. And if we take three of the greatest creative dark princes of the age, we can hear what I'm on about. It's there in Shakespeare, as Hamlet has these self-annihilating lines. Oh, that this is too sullied flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. What if the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter? Oh God, God, how weary, still flat and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Or how about this, from John Donne's third holy sonnet? Oh, might those sighs and tears return again into my breast and eyes which I have spent, that I might in this holy discontent mourn with some fruit as I have mourned in vain. And most of all, as we've already heard, it's in the composer John Dowland's music. Now, Dowland dramatises himself and his sadness in this music called Semper Dowland, Semper Dolens, always Dowland, always sad. Dowland, casting himself, possibly ironically given his reputation for melancholy, he even used to sign himself Dowlandi de Lacrimae, Dowland of Tears, as the lead role in his own psychodrama, a maelstrom of melancholy trapping the souls of all of us, his listeners. And British composers have taken on this distinctly English language mode and melancholy in the 20th century. Dowland's songs, these signifiers of sadness, have been used as the starting point by later composers who have variously liquefied, amplified and honoured them. So let's hear what his 20th century descendants have done with them. Dowland's song, If My Complaints Could Passion Move,
If my complaints could passions move, or make love see wherein I suffer wrong.
and now Benjamin Britten's Lacrimae. This excavates new melancholic meanings for the mid-20th century, just as surely as Dowland did in his own time. Another Dowland lute song, this one, In Darkness Let Me Dwell. It's turned into music by another 20th century composer, and 21st century composer too, Thomas Addis. And in this piece, called Darkness Visible, Addis somehow makes Dowland's melody, which is here pitched towards the extremes of the keyboard, very low and very high, with these scintillations, repeated notes, these tremors in the middle. He makes the darkness literally visible. He makes blackness shine. So a compressed timeline of melancholy from the Elizabethan era of the 16th century to our own Elizabethan age. But when most people say the blues, they're thinking of music like this.
I got a kind-hearted woman, anything that's worth for me. I got a kind-hearted woman, anything that's worth for me.
Robert Johnson with Kind-Hearted Woman Blues. And we've heard, though, a version of this music before. I'm talking about the notes themselves, not the style of the singer or the style of the guitar playing. But remember the opening of Flow My Tears, John Dowland's theme song.
Flow my tears, fall from your springs.
That sequence of descending notes on the words "flow my tears," slightly differently arranged, they are the essential harmony of Robert Johnson's blues, recorded in 1936. I promise.
Flow
So underneath their differences of time and place and culture, Dowland and Johnson are actually using very similar musical harmonic and melodic progressions to generate the feels here, the feeling of melancholy. It's as if the blues has always been there, not just in our popular musical cultures, but singing a song of musical sadness throughout musical history. But let's turn to the blues as it's most commonly understood, as genre, as an all-encompassing popular music and feeling and way of being in the 20th century and beyond. What makes the blues the blues?
The blues is a number of things. It's a feeling. So, you know, we hear this and we talk about blue notes, you know. Okay, if I go completely technical and talk about the blues scale, okay, it's based on a pentatonic scale. If I do it in F, check this out. 1, 2, 3. So this is the one I paused on. That's the one that is called the blue note. If I add that blue note to what I originally played, I go. So that's a scale that you will commonly hear played over the blues. And so if the chords in a blues are 1, the 1 refers to the degree in the scale where it comes. And then it goes to the 4, right? And then back to the 1, and then it goes to the 5. I mean, everyone will be familiar with etc., etc., okay?
But where did the blues start being the blues? And why? The music that became known as the blues was taken from work songs and chain gangs. It was born out of that terrible situation of slavery, utilising all of the things around. Gospel music in the black community transformed many of the hymns we're so familiar with. They absorbed the folk and country music. So all of these things were sort of combined. It all came together in the 19th century. The first written blues piece that used the name blues was in 1912. In 1914, W.C. Handy wrote St. Louis Blues. And that's really sort of the benchmark of what we identify as the blues form, because he's got that sensibility where it's going from the 1 to the 4 and it's in the 12 bar. The great interpreters are Ma Rainey, who was born in the 1880s.
My doorbell this morning, gone over the way to go. My bell rang this
Betty Smith.
when it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night. When it rained 5 days and the sky turned dark as night.
Ma Rainey was considered the mother of blues. Betty Smith was renowned as the empress of the blues. And then later on you start to hear about Robert Johnson and Son House and Charlie Patton. and then the music starts to change. Muddy Waters is completely influenced by trying to be like those guys.
Yeah, bring me champagne when I'm thirsty. Bring me a reefer when I want to get high.
He, along with people like Howlin' Wolf and John Lee Hooker, they start to create what's known as Chicago blues. They're including more instrumentalists, pianos, drums, bass, and then the music starts to electrify. And that's when it starts to turn into the thing we recognise as rock and roll in the 50s, when blues was just taken and used in this new form and done by white people and retitled. I guess throughout all of music, whether it's hip-hop, whether it's any of the heavy metal bands or indie bands, every manifestation of popular music that has even the hint of song form and R&B, it all sits on the foundation of the blues. The thing about a musical sound or a technique is that you can imitate it, mimic it, or even simply steal it. And it's not just rock and roll, because in the classical and modernist music of the 1920s and 30s, the blues as an accent, those blue notes, or as texture, as colour, was taken into the works of composers on both sides of the Atlantic. The American composer George Gershwin is one of them. Here's his Rhapsody in... what was it again? Rhapsody in Blue. Gershwin making blue notes a part of the world of the concert hall. All of those inflections, right from the crescendo in the clarinet solo, which starts us off in that piece, all the melodies of this music are infused with blue note harmony and those melodic quirks. George Gershwin would also write Summertime from his opera Porgy and Bess, a piece that stakes its claim as the first opera with an all-African-American cast written by a composer. Summertime was blues in all but name. Gershwin wrote that tune a few years after the French composer Maurice Ravel had composed this melody, a movement that's called, guess what? Blues, from his violin sonata. Ravel's blues. Well, kind of. In fact, scrap that, not at all, because this is music that refers to the style of blues. It even seems to prefigure some of the summertime melody, but it's anything but blue. While Ravel relished experiencing the jazz craze himself, what he actually does in this music is make a kind of prism from the blues. It's not the real thing. The blues is examined by Ravel here, forensically, gorgeously. As one commentator put it, where are the blue notes? The musical essence of the blues is in the harmony. Ravel adheres to a style that's peculiarly his own. Well, here's another European modernist composer, Igor Stravinsky in 1945 with his Ebony Concerto. More than a flavour of the blues. There's something in this music, like its final chord, which sounds like the old blues itself. You feel like this kind of noise could have been useful to the jazz legends of the day. But while the blues might have meant African culture to Stravinsky, the fact that the vast majority of the popular music that we listen to today is influenced by the blues, whether the performers and communities who first made the genre famous like it or not. I'm talking about white boys' appropriation of blues in the mid-20th century.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. Put your glad rags on, join me home. We'll have some fun when the clock strikes 1. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight. We're gonna rock, rock, rock till broad daylight. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
Because of recordings, that feeling of the blues, a music that came from the experiences of African Americans, has been taken up by everyone. If you take, for example, Bill Haley and his Comets, Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, these guys become the acceptable face of a music that people love. So this idea of society mistreating African Americans and black people and feeling that it's right, if something comes along that allows you to live in that lie, then a lot of people, or the powers that be, will just fall for it. And I think that not that I would call Elvis Presley or those guys victims, but in a sense, they're the victim of that too. That society would prefer to see them singing black music than black people. I think if you look at like Eric Clapton or the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, they always say they're trying to play the blues. But the fact that it transforms and translates into other things, and that those other expressions live in their culture, start to come forth, it kind of makes sense, because the fusion and hybridization of sound, that's how the blues was born anyway. So you can't blame those guys for being themselves, because they love something they can really, really relate to. That's the bounty of us loving and listening to really great music. It touches you in the place that resonates the most about what it is that it means to be a human being. So music has always had the blues, and it probably always will. And pretty well whatever music you love the most, you're bound to be addicted to the blues, those melancholic, tear-strewn musical falls. We're all falling down these musical rabbit holes, always on, and never getting enough of it. And you know what the strangest thing of all is? The blues never make you blue.
2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
To love.